I am Alessandra Venturini, the holder of the Jean Monnet Chair in European Migration Studies. I'm very glad to start for the third year the series of seminars on migration. This one we have a special subject which is very updated to the events that we have. That means the driver of migration European neighborhood. And we are very happy and glad that Ivan Martin has accepted to introduce this seminar, because Ivan Martin is a special professor, because he's a senior professor at the Policy Center for New South in Morocco, and also a adjunct professor at the Faculty of Governance, Economic and Social Science at Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. But he is also associate researcher at the Research Center Greeting of the University Pompeu Fabra. He has spent many years with me at the European University Institute in Florence and the Migration Policy Center. He was also expert for the European Commission on the DevCo, that's mean Development and Cooperation section. That means that he knows a lot about migration in the destination country, but also in the sending country. He was also research administration at the Natolin campus in Poland. He has worked in many research projects, but what is special of him, I don't read all his CV that you can find in the booklet of the seminar. He is a special professor because he has worked a lot in the sending country. So he's not only somebody who studied migration in Europe, but also somebody who is living in the sending country, stay with people there, so understanding and sharing the vision of the phenomena also with the people of the sending country. And today he is with us to introduce the subject. And nobody could be better than him because he has exactly this expertise. Ivan, I don't go for too long. I leave you the flow. And thank you very much for spending our time with us. We also hope in the future to have also Hassan Boubakri to intervene to this seminar, but for the moment, we leave to you the introduction. I have a number of students in front of me that I can show you. We have people online also, and the seminar will be recorded and available on the Chair WebEx, on the YouTube page of the Chair WebEx. Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. It's a pleasure to be with you. In particular, first, we hadn't worked together for a few years now, and yes, it was high time to do it again. For those of you who are online through WebEx, I would encourage and thank you if you turn on the cameras, because it is more motivating for me to see a few faces and not just a few black cases with unknown names. So thank you, Carol, and whoever else can turn it on. Thank you. Yes, I mean, I have been working on the Mediterranean for 25 years now, on Euro-Mediterranean relations, on Mediterranean migration for the last more than 10 years, actually 13, 14 years, with Alexandra a lot. And in the last, and I think, and this is important, Alexandra has underlined it, I have been working as consultant for mainly EU delegations in Southern Mediterranean countries in the last few years. Only, I mean, in December, I concluded the mission in Morocco on assisting vulnerable migrants, mainly from Sub-Saharan Africa. In 2021, I worked the whole year in Tunisia. I have this year still given training to the Ministry of Labor in Turkey on labor migration policies. I have formulated two major migration routes, African migration routes projects for Swiss cooperation in East Africa and in West Africa. Just to say that I'm going to make a quick introduction. We don't have much time. My idea is to talk maybe 35, 45 minutes. And then eventually, if Hassan Boubakri from Tunisia, who is one, if not the biggest expert on migration in Tunisia, whether if he manages to join us, he will make some comments and additional insights. And then, of course, I will be open to your questions and try to answer the best I know. So I will also, because this is the first lecture in this year's series of seminars, I'm trying to give an overview on first the drivers of migration in the Mediterranean. It is not as orthodox academic overview. I focus on the bottom line much more than on econometric evidence, but actually the evidence, the data evidence confirms what you are going to see, but I'm simplifying, admittedly, and then I will actually enumerate the main migration governance challenges in the Mediterranean, in the south of the Mediterranean, in the north of the Mediterranean, across the Mediterranean, and just give some very telegraphic elements on what is the policy response countries in the north and the south of the Mediterranean giving to this challenge. So I will divide my presentation in two parts, which is correlate exactly to the title of the session on drivers and migration governance challenges. On drivers of migration, I remember a few years back, you remember, Alexandra, we were asked to give a training to the new commissioner on development cooperation at the European Commission, and we had to use 15 minutes to give the bottom line on migration and development cooperation to him. And I summarized the drivers of migration in all context. One is demographic transition. The other one are economic income inequalities. I'm going to come to these two specifically for the Mediterranean. But before doing that, I will refer one issue which is very fashionable now to mention, which is climate change as one potential driver of migration. I just propose you a very simple exercise, is thinking how many times you have read about climate change induced migration in southern Mediterranean, in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Egypt, and how many times you have heard about climate change induced migration or potential migration in Valencia, in Almeria, or in South Italy. You never, there is no literature on climate change induced migration in Valencia or Almeria. This is because actually the real reason behind migration is lack of development in conjunction jointly with climate change. It is not climate change alone. So I don't think the very extensive literature and the fashion to refer to climate change as one major driver of migration today and anytime in the near future makes much sense. It is climate change together with lack of development that causes or may cause
Ivan, now climate change induce internal migration, not international.
This is the second point. This is the second point I wanted to refer to in relation to climate change. What we are assisting to in southern Mediterranean countries, in particular countries like Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, the Maghreb countries, are the rural exodus, the internal migration, as you mentioned, from the countryside to the cities, urbanization. But this is actually a process which is much more sociological and demographic than climate change induced. It happened in Europe before. And every time we look at it, it is true that it is linked to the ending of exploitation of marginal lands. But this happened in Europe as well, as productivity in the agriculture increases, marginal lands are abandoned, And this is not because of climate change, it's because they were cultivated in a framework of a subsistence agriculture, which is not anymore there. So I honestly, and I have devoted some time, we can discuss it later, but I don't see in the literature, in the data I have reviewed, any evidence of climate change induced migration as a driver, climate change as a driver of migration today or any near future in the Mediterranean at least. The Sahel and Sub-Saharan African, it may be different. Then the two major drivers are still, let me see, because I have, are still, demographic transition and inequalities. I will come back to inequalities in more detail. You will have a full session on demography and migration by one outstanding demographer whom we know very well, Alexander and me, Philip Park, so I won't go in any detail, just this slide to explain that as you are very aware of, Europe has completed long ago in the 60s, 70s, the demographic transition. It is basically in most of the countries of Europe in a situation of demographic stagnation, if it would not be precisely by the contribution of migration. And the Southern Mediterranean countries, in contrast, talking or referring to the region from Morocco all the way to Turkey, including, of course, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, and Palestine. In these countries, demographic transition is now ongoing. And there is one simple graph for migration purposes, in my opinion, that reflects this perfectly well. This is the graph you have here, where you can see the percentage of the total population older than 15 years old, so the total working age population and seniors, who are made by the population between 15 and 34. This is an age bracket which is particularly interesting for our purposes because, as Philippe for sure will explain you, migration happens in most of the cases in this age bracket between 15, actually a little bit later, and 34 years old. So this is the segment of the population that we target when analyzing migration potential. And we can see here that for this age bracket, the three regions in the world where the percentage of the total population of more than 15 years old is the highest are precisely Northern Africa, which is the orange one, the orange line here, Sub-Saharan Africa at large, which is the brown, reddish brown one, and Eastern Africa, meaning all the way from Egypt, Eritrea, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, and so on. In those three regions, the percentage of the population between 15 and 34 is close to 60%. In Eastern Africa, still today 60%. In the others is 58%, 57%. Whereas the world average, you have the blue one here, is 40%. So there is 15, 20 points more of a total population, percentage points more of a total population of this age bracket. This only for Mediterranean, Southern and Eastern Mediterranean countries. This means 66 million more young people so ready to migrate than if those countries would have the world average. You see that other developing regions like Latin America and others have much lower percentages of this young population. For me, and what is also important, this situation is the gap between the world average and the three regions, North Africa, Northern Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. The gap is remaining, is staying stable at least for the next 10 years and probably more. Because the demographic transition, the birth rates are only now starting to decrease in countries like Tunisia, less so in Morocco, in Algeria, and it has not even started to decrease or it has even increased, as maybe Philippe will explain, in countries like Egypt. So this is the first reason for or cause for migration, driver of migration in the region. I want just to give a historical glimpse, which I consider very useful. Europe during the demographic transition, which happened in Europe between the mid 19th century and the first third of the 20th century, between 1850 and 1920 something 30 until the Second World War, exported more or sent more than 40 million migrants over a total population at the time in the mid 19th century of only 4 times more, 150,000, 150 million migrants. So almost 1/4 of the total European population migrated over this long period of demographic transition. We are in phase in Northern Africa and Southern and Eastern Mediterranean countries, and actually Sub-Saharan African countries as well. We are in phase of a very shortened demographic transition, so it is much quicker, and it is normal. This has happened in every country in the past, that this demographic transition creates migration. This
In
is
fact,
the
in fact,
first.
in Europe,
Yes,
in
Alexandra?
Europe, in that time, the number of children per woman was around this number, 5, 6, even 10. And so now the fertility is the crucial element to push migration.
Exactly. I mean, the demographic transition consists in the process of adjusting the natality, the birth rate, to the decreased mortality rate. And this process is only now starting to take place in Southern and Eastern Mediterranean countries. It took place over almost 80 years in Europe in the 19th and 20th century. So
Yes.
this is the first element. The second element is, as you can see in the graph, income inequalities. And here I'm very formal. Actually, it is very often the case that you can see correlations or explanations to migration related to unemployment, which certainly plays a role. I mean, I'm an expert in labor markets and unemployment, so employment policy, so I'm sensitive enough to this issue. But the real driver of migration are wage differentials, is what people perceive and measure when taking the decision to migrate. And however much employment you have in a country, if the salaries are so low that migrating means multiplying by 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 times the income of the labor migrants, people have incentives to migrate regardless of their unemployment or employment status. A very clear example, a real one, the minimum wage in Morocco right now is something like 250 euros a month. 250 euros a month is the minimum wage, which is actually a ceiling rather than a basis for salaries, unlike Europe, where the minimum wage is really the minimum wage. In Morocco is what regularized or regular recognized employees receive, but you have 30 to 40% irregular employment, which don't even get the minimum wage. Anybody migrating to Spain, which is not a particularly rich country, will get, for any work after being regularized, the minimum wage, which is now 1,100 euros per month. So this means it will more than multiply 5 times its income, and out of a 1,100 euros a month, you can easily, even if of course prices and rent and everything is much more expensive in Spain, but you can easily spare 10 20% of your income for remittances, and this means a minimum wage in Morocco. So the inequalities, the wage differentials are the key driver of migration. Much more, I insist, than unemployment per se. And unfortunately, we don't have reliable and systematic data on wage and comparable data on wages across countries, but we do have a very good proxy, which are the GDP per capita in purchasing power parity. Actually, this is the best proxy you can find in available economic statistics for wages. And I have taken, yes?
Ivan, sorry, may I ask you something? But the prices, because in general, when we compare GDP wages, migrant compare nominal wages. They don't discount.
No. Here,
GDP per capita is, of course.
Here we compare, not we, the World Bank compares. I have only made the ratios. The World Bank compares GDP per capita in purchasing power parity at current international dollars. This means that it takes account for the difference of prices. It is not nominal, it is purchasing power parity, because this is what migrants take into account, okay? And what I have done in this table is comparing the euro area over a period of a little bit more than 30 years, between 1990 and 2021, which are the last official available data. 2022 will make it even worse, as we will see. And I have taken this data for the euro area, which are the most, practically all destination countries within the European Union, and compare it with 5 southern and eastern Mediterranean countries, the big migration countries, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and Turkey. The same exercise can be made for Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestinian Authority very easily, but I didn't want to. You can do it yourself if you want. And also for Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, which the World Bank divides into Western and Central sub-Saharan Africa and South and East sub-Saharan Africa. And I have just on the basis of the data provided by the World Bank, calculated the ratios between GDP per capita in the euro area and each of those countries or areas. And you can see for Morocco, it has gone from 6.60%, 6.6 times euro area more than Morocco. It has gone down very marginally to 5.73 in the last available data times. This means that the GDP per capita in purchasing power parity in Morocco is 5.7 times lower than in the euro area. For Algeria, it has gone up, so there has been no convergence, rather the contrary, from 2.44 times to 4.19 times. For Tunisia, it has actually been stable. It reduced marginally between 1999 and 2008 to increase and come back to the original situation, 4.5 times more in the euro area. For Egypt, it has managed to reduce it, but also marginally, from 4.6 times to 4 times, roughly. And for Turkey, is the country who has experienced the most persistent reduction of this gap, income gap, from 2 times to 1.6 times, even if for 2022, because the major devaluation of the Turkish lira in 2022, this will probably increase quite dramatically, probably back to 2 times or more. So what we see here for the Mediterranean is that regardless of details, the income gap, income differential in purchasing power parity, so taking into account price differentials, have not been reduced over this period of 30 years. So one of the major drivers of migration has not been corrected at all. And I have also added the two African groupings that the World Bank uses. You can see that for Western and Central Africa, going from Central African Republic, Nigeria, Ghana, all the way to Senegal, Cameroon, this is Western and Central Africa. This has gone up very dramatically from 9.3 times in 1990 to 13 times now, and actually with provisional data that I didn't include in the table for 2022, it will be 15 times. So the income differences are growing dramatically and over a long time period, and less so, but the same trend can be seen for Eastern and Southern Africa, where income differentials in GDP per capita with euro area have gone up from 9.7 to 11.5 times more in the euro area. This is just to say that the combination of demographic dynamics and the dynamics of income differentials actually don't allow us to expect any significant reduction of migration pressures in the near future. There are two major issues which can be drawn, or major conclusions that elements for thinking, food for thought that can be drawn from this analysis. One is that we are not seeing any convergence, at least at country level, in the Mediterranean or between Europe and Africa. And this is a key element to understand the drivers of migration. And this is, of course, related to the World Economic Order. This is an expression which dates back to the 70s. At the time, there was a wave of analysis and international cooperation policies to produce, to create a new World Economic Order. Very obviously, migration, international migration, is a structural feature of current World Economic Order, of current international trade and international cooperation models. I go back to this slide. I won't delve on the other causes, but I think it is worth mentioning. There are two other structural causes of migration, structural drivers of migration, more in the destination countries, that cannot be ignored. One is labor demand in Europe, and this has become very, very obvious when we have seen the development of migration flows to Europe across the Mediterranean in the years of the economic crisis. When the labor demand in Europe stopped because of the economic crisis between 2008 and 2013, migration flows were dramatically reduced or even stopped for a while. In Spain, this was very obvious. In Italy as well, there was a increasing trend of migration flows until 2008. Then they decreased, and they only recovered after 2014, when the economic demand was restored after the major crisis starting in 2008. And the other element, which is also structural and depending or related to the North Mediterranean countries, the differences in refugee protection regimes. Protection of refugees is international, it's based on an international convention, as you know, but actual protection schemes are national, and they vary very much in every sense, in terms of benefits, in terms of access to labor market, in terms of prospects for integration, in terms of prospect for getting the nationality, and many other elements across countries. And it is much more favorable. The protection regime for refugees is much more, or protection regimes for refugees are much more favorable for refugees in Europe than they are in Southern and Eastern Mediterranean countries. In Morocco, in Tunisia, having a refugee status actually only means that you cannot be expelled, that you cannot be returned back to your country, which is already something, but it doesn't mean that you get basically any help or very marginal food help sometimes. Most of them don't get anything. This is not the case in Germany, in Sweden, or in the Netherlands. And this explains why refugees or asylum seekers are eager to reach Europe instead of remaining in southern and eastern Mediterranean countries. And this is why
This is a very important issue that the different legislation, so the Mediterranean country are like a step toward a support for asylum seeker. So they can enter Morocco or they can enter Egypt, but after they want to go to a country which provide them better service, better support.
and more benefits, absolutely, and more prospects for integration into the labor market. So for me, these are the key drivers of migration in the Mediterranean, the key structural drivers. I think we shouldn't ignore conjunctural causes of drivers. So drivers which are linked not to structural features of the economy or the society, but to conjunctural ones, like drought. Drought is a major issue now, or it has been for the last 3 years in countries like Tunisia and Morocco. It mainly pushes for internal migration. It is very closely related to the rural exodus phenomenon I was mentioning before. And so it fits more into urbanization than into international migration. But very often urbanization is the first step for some additional international migration. So drought is indirectly also one of the drivers of international migration for these countries. Economic crisis, I will see now in a moment one additional slide related to this, but migration from Morocco, for instance, was slowly decreasing until the COVID-19 economic crisis, where it exploded again. In Tunisia, actually, we saw how migration, I don't know whether Hassan Boubakri has joined us in the meantime, and he may correct me, but we had a decreasing trend over years, and then it increased dramatically. Well, first in the year of the revolution in 2011, then it decreased back to the normal trend, but then it has increased ever since as a very clear response strategy or strategy to respond to the economic crisis. And this was especially so after the COVID-19 induced economic crisis. You will have a full session on the impact in Africa of the Ukraine war with Sona Kalantarian, and you will see how famine and inflation is indeed or are indeed two drivers, short-term drivers of migration, very often in the first instance as the drought, internal migration, but in a second moment is international migration, and of course conflicts in the region. This only refers actually to Syria, because the conflict in Libya is a very low populated country, and the flows of international migration coming from Libya are actually irrelevant. So yes, on drivers, one final slide that I think it is important to keep in mind. As you may have seen in your classes on international migration, there is a strong pattern of the international migration rates in relation to GDP per capita, also in purchasing power parity, which says that in the early stages of development, migration is very low because people cannot afford to migrate. This increases as a country gets up the development ladder, and there is a turning point over or beyond which people stop migrating. Internationally, there is a very clear example of that in Mexico, for instance, where you have the explosion of migration over years when Mexico developed, and then since 2005, 2007, migration has gone down. So very clearly, for whichever causes, Mexico has gone beyond this turning point where immigration rates tend to decrease. Spain went through this process as well, just to refer to another Mediterranean country, which happens to be my country. After the demographic transition, this created 2 million migrants. After the early 80s, actually the mid 70s already, but then in the early 80s, many of those migrants returned. Spain has still 1 million international migrants. So sometimes in the early 80s, and linked, of course, to joining the European Union, Spain went over this turning point where migration started to decrease. In this, this is the theoretical pattern popularized by Hein de Haas in one of his seminal books on international migration. This is the evidence by groups of countries divided by income level. You can see that the blue bars, which reflect the percentage of immigrants of the total population, so the immigration rates increases from very low to middle income countries, and then it starts to decrease for high and very high income countries. The red bars are the immigration, which, as the theory predicts, increases over the development process. And here, this is a graph I produced already a few years back in 2015, but the pattern has not changed a lot, as you could see in the table before, where I used until 2021. And here I plotted the immigration, the stock of migrants per 1,000 inhabitants, so the immigration rate and the GDP per capita. And you can see that actually a country like Algeria, Morocco in 2013, 2015, Tunisia, they were close to the turning point. And actually, I started to do field work in those countries in the early 2010s, in 2011, 2012, and I could see how international recruiters have problems to recruit workers, low-skilled workers for low salaries in many of these countries. I remember, for instance, the French employment agency wanting to recruit drivers in Tunisia, offering minimum wage in France, and they had difficulties to find them, not because there were not enough drivers in Tunisia, but because people hesitated to move for such a salary. This is not anymore the case. Very clearly, those countries have bounced back into the upwards migration trend, and very clearly we can expect in at least these countries an increase of migration as they developed over the coming years. But this just to say that, of course, this turning point is not the same for every country. What you have plotted here is just the trend for all African countries, and countries can bounce back, or the turning point can change depending on other elements, political or social elements. This as far
So,
as the,
Ivan,
yes,
sorry, Ivan, just to sum up.
of
So
course.
what you want to say is that the Mediterranean, the African Mediterranean country are no more the sending country. They will not be the sending country of the future.
Well, in the
There
long
will be
future,
more
they won't be.
transit.
What
Sorry?
the bottom line, the summary of what I have said so far is that both the key drivers of international migration in Southern and Eastern Mediterranean countries are demographics and income inequalities, and both key drivers are here to stay at least for the next 10 to 15 years as we know it. So I don't see in the next 10 to 15 years any significant reduction of migration pressures, rather the contrary. If we generalize this analysis for Africa, this is even more, because population dynamics is more exaggerated in Africa than in Northern Africa, where some countries are already completed the demographic transition, and income differentials are much bigger between sub-Saharan African and Euro area than between Northern African countries and Euro area. Remember, 1 to 5, 6 between Euro area and Morocco, 1 to 4 with Algeria, 1 to 2 or a little bit less with Turkey, whereas it is reaching 1 to 15 with Eastern Africa. So in the long future, no doubt this will revert as those countries develop and the demographic transition is completed. In the near future, I don't see this reduction anytime soon, whatever the international community may do. Okay. Now, second part, we can get back to this and other explanations of migration, but I think the virtue of this overview is mainly the synthesis and pointing, targeting the key drivers. The second part of my presentation relates to governance of migration across the Mediterranean, some challenges and policy responses. Basically, in the coming slides, we have in the left the key challenges, and in the right column, they are not strictly columns, but in the right, the policy responses. And I have first addressed the challenges for Southern and Eastern Mediterranean countries, so for Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, all the way to Turkey. And for those countries, I think there are 3 major areas of challenges. One is immigration. This is the first one. We shouldn't forget, I should have included one table on that, but we shouldn't forget that for those countries, roughly on average, 10% of the population are international migrants. This is much more so for countries like Lebanon. It is less so for countries like Turkey or Egypt. It is roughly around 10% in countries like Tunisia and Morocco. So immigration is the first policy challenge related to migration. And this poses 3 major areas of policy action and policy challenge. One is brain drain, the migration of qualified population, qualified workers. Here, the policy response is laissez-faire. No country in the region has an articulate brain drain contention policy. And despite the fact that in a few countries in the region, this has become a real problem, not for the whole of the economy, but for specific sectors. The medical sector is very clear, after the COVID-19 in particular, but not only. Engineering, informatics, or even management, general management are sectors where there are very clear evidence of brain drain, lack of human resources and human capital in countries like Morocco and Tunisia. In Lebanon, this is much more generalized because this is a small country with a very, very large diaspora and very big and increasing migration flows. In countries like Egypt and Turkey, because the very, very large population and well-developed education systems, actually brain drain is not much of a problem. But I see brain drain, and we can discuss all the theoretical developments on brain gain, brain waste, whatever. I give a 2 hours lecture on this very often. We can discuss it later.
I will have very soon a lecture on this.
Okay, but this is basically a superstructure to hide. The bottom line is that brain drain is a problem related to migration in those countries, at least for specific sectors which are key for future development. green transition, digital transformation are the buzzwords now for future development, and precisely in these sectors, the lack of human resources because of international migration is most acute. Second issue is the issue of remittances. Those countries, I have a slide here, I think, yeah, I have a slide here on remittances to the Mediterranean countries. In the left graph, you have the absolute total amount in billions of dollars for 2021, which are the last figures we have official. You see that Egypt received more than 33 billion dollars a year. Morocco more than 9 billion dollars, and so on. In relative terms to the GDP, the Lebanon is the country with the highest percentage of remittances over total GDP. Is more than almost 35%, so its economy basically dependent on international migration remittances. Well, Palestine is a very specific case. It's up to 17%, but well, the economy is of course, penalized by occupation. But you have then a group of countries from Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia, where the GDP weight of remittances, international remittances, is between 5 and 8%, which makes remittances one of the major sources of external finance, development finance for those countries. However, what we see is that they are indeed very useful and appreciated as a key factor of macroeconomic stabilization. In particular, I mean, out of the development finance sources in North Africa, remittances are the first source. I had the graph, they haven't included it. The second one is international development assistance, official development assistance. The third one is international foreign direct investment. And the official development assistance and remittances are the two sources which are not very volatile. They are quite stable. It is true that after COVID-19, there was a drop because of the closure of official non-official channels for sending remittances. This was actually recovered afterwards, and this makes remittances a key source of macroeconomic stabilization. But at the same time, I don't know any country in the region which has mainstream remittances into their development strategies. And I know what I'm talking about because I did 2 reports on mainstream immigration into development planning in Tunisia and Morocco. So there is not a true policy optimization, I would say, of the potential contribution of remittances to development. In terms of the diaspora and return, the diaspora policy is very much focused in those countries in social and cultural aspects, in political control sometimes. I'm referring to countries like Morocco, like Tunisia, like Turkey. And all of them share a certain promotion of return of skilled migrants, which is the only way actually to respond to the brain drain issue. Even if they don't have any direct policy to avoid or compensate for brain drain, they do have policies to incentivize or promote return of skilled migrants. These are the main challenges and policy responses regarding immigration. But I would say overall that immigration policies in those countries are quite weak, apart from the social and cultural and political aspects of diaspora policy. Then those countries have a challenge of transit migration. Migrants coming through these countries, mainly from sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. You have seen now, as Alexandra was mentioning, the break 2 days ago, they were mainly coming from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, if I remember well. But in in many cases, the people they came through Turkey. This is why they were Asian citizens. In the case of Morocco, Tunisia, or even Egypt, when it used to be a platform for departure as well, you usually had mainly African citizens. And here this poses two parallel or a double challenge. One is border control and the proliferation of irregular migration, very much as we do have in Europe. And the policy response has been to keep those transit migrants in a legal limbus. It is not, they are irregular migrants, it's very clear, but they are tolerated in much of the cases. They are not expelled in many of the cases. Morocco doesn't carry out any official expulsion. Tunisia, neither. Algeria, yes, but in a very concealed way, I would say. So there is a quite ambiguous legal situation of irregular migrants, transit migrants in those regions. In all those countries, there is an issue related to transit migration, which is quite important, which is, in most of the cases, they are very much vulnerable migrants, irregular migrants, transit migrants, and they need humanitarian assistance. They are deprived even of food, clothes, documents, whatever. And the strategy in all those countries is very clearly, with the exception of Turkey, is very clearly to outsource this humanitarian assistance to international organizations and international NGOs, to let international organizations to provide this humanitarian assistance and to, somehow cope with these vulnerabilities. So just to mention that it is not only European Union which conducts externalization of migration policies. Also, Southern and Eastern Mediterranean countries have their own outsourcing to international organizations of refugees. In most of the cases, they don't have asylum laws, so they don't officially, even if they have ratified the Geneva Convention. So that means that it is the High Commissioner for Refugees which is in charge of all the status determination and supporting to refugees. And then a very marginal but not irrelevant issue is the issue of immigration, labor immigration. In some of these countries, in particular Tunisia, to a lesser extent, Morocco, much more Turkey. In those countries, there is an increasing need, not very high, but in sectors like construction and agriculture, of foreign labor. Not because they don't have enough labor, they do have it, but because, as we know it in Europe as well, the level of income of many of the nationals has reached a level where they don't want to do certain jobs. In particular for harvesting, this is very clear, for instance, in olive harvesting in Tunisia, in some agricultural work in Morocco, and in Turkey, even in some industrial industries. And the policy in this regard has always been, or is common, is irregularity. There is no pathway for regularization in most of those countries, and no prospect for integration. There are two special cases out of the 8-10 countries we are talking about. One is Morocco, and the other one is Turkey. Turkey has indeed, the largest refugee population in the world, even if they are not officially recognized as refugee by the country. The 2.4 million Syrians in the country, and it is the Turkish state which provides them assistance through NGOs, also partly through international organizations and international NGOs, and it has allowed a massive integration into the labor market irregularly as informal employment. But this has concerned 2 million Syrian refugees over the last 7 years, which is huge. The other case is Morocco, where back in 2014 adopted a national strategy for immigration and asylum. It regularized up to 50,000 migrants, and it offered a pathway for regularization and integration, which was quite interesting because from an economic point of view, there was not demand for that labor, not as regular labor anyway. And actually, this has changed in between. The law, the national strategy is still formally in place, but the renewals of these work permits and residence permits are being very slow. They require a formal contract, which is almost impossible to get. So this means the number of regular, and many of these regularized migrants have moved on to Europe anyway. So the number of regular immigrants regularized in 2014 and 2016 in Morocco is decreasing all the time. Now, probably we have less than 20,000 or 25,000, and there is no new pathway for regularization provided for in the law. And
Ivan, sorry, just to make up, because I don't know if all the students, also myself, to recall. I remember that in Egypt, 60% of the economy was irregular, 30% was public, and 10% private, just to understand. So on the total of 100% of employment, 60% was in the black market, no regular, 10% private, and the other public. In Morocco, I don't know if it is similar, but I imagine that there is 50% informal.
40%, in terms of employment, 40%
informal, and there will be 20%, 30% private, 30% public.
Yeah, 25 public, and yes, it's less than in Egypt.
25 public and 35 private.
So this only means that actually this policy response to let immigrants work informally in the market actually matches the structure of the labor market very much. I mean, it is normal in countries where informal economy, informal employment is so widespread.
Yes, but in Spain, how much it is the informal economy?
Informal employment is up to 20%. Between
20%, exactly. So we are a little bit less than Morocco, because Morocco, you said half the Morocco, but the South European country, and in Italy, I think there is a large share of informal economy. And we have to, the student has to understand that the northern shore, the Mediterranean country, the countries that are on the shore of the Mediterranean, have a model of the economy which is the double of the one that we have in South Europe. 40% is informal, even more in Asia. So when we speak of legalization, of course, if the informal economy, like in Germany or in Finland, is less than 10% or 5%, you understand that is a different situation.
But these are two different issues. They are two different issues. I take the case of Tunisia, for instance. In Tunisia, if you are Tunisian, you may work in the informal sector, but you have access to healthcare, public healthcare, not everything, but most of the benefits, and you have actually access to key services like a bank account and so on. If you are an irregular immigrant, you cannot even have a bank account. You cannot have any access to public, I'm talking about Tunisia, to public education or health services. So regularization is not about giving you a formal job. It is about giving you a status that allows you to reside, to stay in the country. And this is at least to stay in the country, and not this. You shouldn't forget also that those countries have police and police bodies which are prone to corruption. And having irregular migrants around is a recipe for corruption and abuses of every kind, which you can see very often, which doesn't happen with national workers, for instance. So regularization is not only about accessing the formal employment. This is not very easy for foreigners, for migrants, even if they are regularized. It is about having a minimum status, protecting them, protecting their basic human rights.
But you see, like in Spain, you can be registered at the local office even if you are irregular.
Yeah, this has changed now, but this was the case for a very long time. Yeah.
But it was a way to control the number of the population, give a minimum access.
No, it was a way also to provide basic social services, education and health to irregular migrants without regularizing them.
Yes.
But anyway, the big difference, even in the case of Morocco, which has a special regularization or had a special regularization process, the bottom line is in Europe, once you are regularized, you have a pathway for staying. This is very clear.
Okay.
This is not the case in Morocco, in Tunisia, or in Egypt, or in Turkey. You are seeing now in the upcoming elections in Turkey, one of the key issues is to return back the Syrians to Syrian territory. Okay, which in Europe it would be, I mean, once you are regularized, you are regularized. I mean, that's it. Okay. And then the same happens with asylum. Those countries have, in many cases, ratified the Geneva Convention, but the best way to define what they, how they behave in relation to asylum and refugee recognition is the formula of non-accueil, not hosting or not asylum, which gave one report in Tunisia, which very clearly defines the legal limbus, the legal ambiguous space where even refugees live in those countries. Yes, final slide, and I will conclude with this. Some governance of migration challenges across the Mediterranean and the policy responses concerning Mediterranean European countries, Italy, Spain, Greece, and the other smaller states, Cyprus, Malta, and to a certain extent, but much less, France. First, it's interesting just to start by looking at this map that you have seen also somewhere, but probably you haven't seen it in relation to the name of the migration routes. We have just seen the tragedy a couple of days ago in South Italy, and everybody refers naturally to the Mediterranean migration routes, Western Mediterranean migration route, Central Mediterranean migration route, and so on. But if we see this map, which basically displays the routes of migrants from the countries of origin to Europe, we would never call them Mediterranean migration routes. We would call them African migration routes. Most of the transit through irregular migration routes to Europe happens in African territory and countries, not in the Mediterranean, not in European ones. And I think this is important because this reflects the Eurocentrism with which we all tend to see this phenomenon. The challenges related to governance of migration in Mediterranean European countries, I have summarized them in this slide. First, very clearly, is the lack of a single EU migration policy. This is the key element. At the same time that we have free movement of persons, the Schengen Agreement, we have incomplete creation of a single EU labor market. So we have area free movement of persons with fragmented labor markets by countries, basically 27 labor markets, and different asylum regimes, which I mentioned before. And this is the key source of all dysfunctions. I remember last year in a conference organized by ISPI in Rome, I advocated for Europeanization of labor migration policies, which now lie with member states, not with the European Commission. And everybody said, well, this is not realistic. I said, well, we have done so many things. I mean, we have renounced two borders. So renouncing to labor migration policy shouldn't be a major issue when we have renounced to physical borders, which is the expression of national sovereignty. And this relates to the last challenge I will mention. The migration policy has been so politicized in the last few years. And Alexandra, I know that you have been working on one project related to this perception of migration policies in Europe, that this rational next step of pooling and bringing together and transferring competence on labor migration policy to the European Commission is not even thinkable today. A second challenge, of course, are irregular flows. I question again the name we used to give to Mediterranean migration routes. They are very clearly African migration routes. And this actually poses the issue of border control. The response has been securitization, focusing all the control in the borders for several reasons. I will come back to this in a moment. And this very artificial distinction between refugees and economic migrants. This is a very artificial, I want to be clear about this, this is a very artificial distinction when they are in a situation of danger or in a situation of need, before they reach the European borders. Once they reach a European territory or member state territory, it is very legitimate to distinguish by categories of those arriving, and refugees have some rights and economic migrants may not have them, or yes, depending on their profile. But the issue now is that this distinction has been extended, brought to the sea as well, to the Mediterranean, and even to countries of origin. So, and this is used even to refuse assistance to people in need, to migrants in need, which is undermining EU values and human rights of migrants. And this is a key issue. We are seeing it with the pushbacks in Ceuta and Melilla, the pushbacks in Greece, the pushbacks in Italy as well, to Libya, against all international law and the principle of non-refoulement, just to avoid that they may reach the European territory and be recognized as refugees, which is very hypocritical to the extent that they should be entitled to submit their application first. The third challenge put by this, I would like to add that we don't have, and we are so used to it that it seems obvious, but it is important to reflect about this. Migration challenges in the Mediterranean are regional. This is very clear. We can discuss it, but there is no doubt. But there has been not even any attempt of creating a regional response, policy response to these migration challenges. We have had for 25 years an Euro-Mediterranean partnership. Now we have the Union for the Mediterranean. None of these initiatives is, we have the European neighborhood policy from the European Commission. None of these North-South Mediterranean cooperation frameworks has even attempted to create a joint policy response to the joint challenges posed by migration in the Mediterranean. The response has been not fully European cooperation. Indeed, is the third major challenge I see. Europe has reacted to these challenges by throwing money at them. More and more of the Polish throwing money, throwing resources. With, in parallel, a very clear lack of internal solidarity between Mediterranean countries and the rest of the European countries, which is in a strong contrast with the principles of European integration and a strong contrast with the logical consequences of the Schengen Agreement. This lack of solidarity has been epitomized in the new Pact on Migration and Asylum proposed by the Commission in September 2000, which is not even now formally adopted by the Council, where very clearly there is a policy of money for refugees. If you don't want to take refugees,
Ivan, sorry, let me make a comment. However, I think it will become even more difficult now because Europe has moved to the east. With the enlargement of Europe, the Mediterranean, while in the past the Mediterranean was the focus of migration, was the external border, now with the enlargement, north and east are in a certain way not focused on the Mediterranean. The northern country now they want to enter European Union, while before they were in this intermediate situation, they were not part of Europe, but they were in Europe by border. And now the attention is no more on the south. When Portugal, Spain, and Greece entered the European Union, the Mediterranean became an actor, a very important actor.
You are fully right. You are fully right. But I think that the reason for that is not only that the EU has been enlarged to the east, but also that Central European countries have not had the political courage to link some elements of European integration, like free movement of persons, to solidarity on dealing with these issues. I mean, we are seeing now, for instance, that Eastern European countries are questioning some key elements of the rule of law and democratic regimes, and they are going back on that because the European Union, all of the countries are saying, no, this is a condition for benefiting of a structural
Yes, Ivan, but they have a solidarity versus their own citizens.
Yeah.
So when you with the enlargement, you have they have a different culture, a different vision. So it will take time to have again a European Union who is able to look together the challenge of the Mediterranean, of the border, the southern border. While
and
before,
this element that you introduced, which is totally right, actually explains the drive for externalization of EU migration policies, because the European Union has not been able so far of reaching a basic consensus around internal redistribution of the burden of irregular migration. It tends to push back, I would say, the problem to neighboring countries through externalization policies. Again, funding and what I call the migrantization of relations with those countries. Now there is no single high-level politician from the European Commission, the European Council going to any of those neighboring countries, be Egypt, Morocco, or Turkey, and not talking about migration, and not making sure that those countries cooperate on migration, and basically making all cooperation with those countries to a certain extent dependent on migration cooperation, much more than on other more traditional conditionalities like democracy or like opening reform or opening their markets. So externalization is the second leg of this policy response. Then there is a very paradoxical challenge and policy response at national level. There is a very clear demand for labor in most European countries for both skilled and non-skilled labor. Every study confirms that. And we are already seeing how in the last months, even in the last couple of years, how this is translated in more open policies for legal migration to European member states. Spain has allowed for regularization and recruiting in countries of origin. France has just submitted a law to this effect. Germany did so a couple of years ago. So we are seeing how even core countries, Italy is an exception for now, but maybe not for long. Let's see. What we are seeing is that despite this politicization, despite this anti-immigration and securitization of migration policies, as a matter of fact, national level labor migration policies are becoming more and more flexible to cope and attend for the labor demand in their labor markets. And what is interesting and worrying is that most of these policy initiatives tend to reinforce brain drain in countries of origin. They tend to target specific skills and occupations, which are those who are important as well, for development in countries of origin. I think that's enough. There are a couple of other challenges which are more of a humanitarian nature. The issue of unaccompanied minors, migrants, which is a major issue in countries like France and Spain. The internal differences within the European Union with the refugee status as well, but I won't go further. I would like just to end with this slide, which reflects the number of refugees over total population, the percentage of the number and the percentage of refugees over total population, with Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey being the three first countries in terms of percentage of refugees over total population. Turkey being the one in the world with the highest one. And this says a lot about where the real migration challenges in the Mediterranean are. If you compare these figures with the figures of irregular arrivals to the Mediterranean, in the last year, it was not even 200,000 irregular migrants. In 2022, you have this column here. This is the increase over 2021, and these are the figures over 2021, and these are the figures from 2015. So we are now at not even 200,000 per year. This is ridiculous in terms of absolute numbers in comparison with the real flows that other Mediterranean countries have to face in our southern and eastern shore. Thank you.
Ivan, thank you very much.
I hope my question won't be off topic, but I heard about the resettlement procedures of UNHCR. And I don't understand if there is a phenomenon behind and which phenomenon is. If it's a phenomenon, for example, a migrant moves from Sudan to Morocco, then Morocco cannot give, the definition of resettlement procedure says, Morocco, for example, cannot give the services, enough services to that refugee. So in the asylum, I'm talking about asylum.
The resettlement of the UNHCR is an agreement between some state of destination, grant a number of, that's all.
Yes, but I don't understand if the ratio of these
and the number is very small because they have the asylum before departure, and they have enough persons so the country of destination decide how many people take. For instance, in the year of 2015, when we had 1,500,000 people coming by boat in search of international protection, the High Commissioner for Refugees was able to resettle only 200,000, and for 80% in Canada and the United States. In general, these are taken in a very far away country, not in a close away country.
Okay.
Let me introduce Hassan. Hassan is Professor of Geography and Migration Study at University of Sousse, President of the Tunis Center for Migration and Asylum. He is member of many research laboratory CFECT, University of Sfax. He's a European part of many research ERC projects, which are the most important projects. One is the vital element post-colonial moves for things the art of paying attention in the Mediterranean harbor town. The second one, another ERC project, Soul Routes, that means Solidarity Migrant Route across Europe at large, or an Horizon Proven Europe Gaps, Euromed meeting. He is member of Academy Network as Anan, Naman, and many other, and is publishing a lot. You have a list of the publication on the field, which are more relevant at the end of the booklet. So I will give him the floor to comment on what Ivan said, just to stress some of the points that you consider more relevant, especially that the European audience don't know.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and the whole team of the Jean Monnet chair in the University of Torino, I think. And of course, I'm really happy to meet my friend, my long-term friend and colleague, Ivan. And of course, hello for everybody who I don't know them, and I am really happy to know you and to interact with you on this. On this topic. So the issue and the topic of migration driver is a classical issue, and I think after this relevant speech of Ivan, I don't know if what can I add after that, but
it will be a challenge, but you
yes,
can, I know.
Yes. So I think that since the post-colonial era and the beginning of the post-colonial era after in North Africa, I mean, because I will, and in Africa in general, in sub-Saharan Africa, and they prefer saying the Sahara south of Africa, because when you say sub-Saharan Africa is like behind the Sahara. So there is the conjunctural and the structural drivers about which Ivan told us now are relevant. There is a continuum of this driver. We are agreed, but of course some of them are more critical. Some of them they are more strong, and other are more weapon now. And I think that a lot of these drivers are renewed with new conjuncture, renewed, and with the new context. And I think the demographic driver, the economic driver, they are renewed with the successful and the successful context which are happens, and the events, the last which we have, the COVID-19. After that, you have the drought context in North Africa, for example, and you know though that the arid area is moving to the north. That means that the very arid and drought area is now on North Africa. And I think just when I arrived, when I joined you, Ivan, you said that you didn't correct me if I have misunderstood. You said that there is no impact of drought and of climate change on North Africa. I don't know if I misunderstood this or no, but I think that no, since some years, when the drought and the climate change is more hard, there is now a lot of internal migration from the south and the center of Tunisia and the arid area of the Maghreb country, they moved to the towns, they moved to the coastal area. And some of them, they component the flowers which are leaving Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria to Europe. So the second thing is all the countries are in political, economical and social crisis. Libya is since 2011 in the situation which everybody know, and Tunisia, we are not. There is more and more difficulties for the population to live in Tunisia today, and in Algeria, the crisis, the Iraq demonstrated that there is the power, the system is still here, and the deep driver of the living of and the migration of Algerian are there. And I would like to arrive to this Tunisian, Libyan, Italian situation, what I call the migration triangle. Now the president last Tuesday, yes, his speech is that there is a lot of migrants, and they are sub-Saharan migrants. They are now replacing, and they are now moving the Tunisian people from Tunisia, and there is a complot, and I think that this because in this since last summer and since last autumn there is closing partnership between Tunisia and Italian government in order to push back and to return to intercept more and more migration. And today, with this hard and very dramatic crisis of sub-Saharan in Tunisia, is linked to the more and more closed policy between Tunisia and Italy. You know, for Italy, Libya is on the pocket, if we can say. From 2017, there is the implementation of the agreement between the Libyan government and the Italian government. And for Tunisia, if we have more and more African in the street, that's real, but it's about 20, 25, 30 is the maximum of sub-Saharan in Tunisia. It's
30 is a lot.
Yes, it is 0.5 of the Tunisian population, not more, and perhaps less. And 10,000 of them are in regular situation. That means they are students, they are workers, they are international worker, and perhaps there is 5, 6, 10,000 who are irregular. Why? Because they are pushed back, and since some years, the number of intercepted and pushed back migrants from the sea, from the continental water, from the national water, and also from the international water in the Mediterranean, they are more and more. And this year, I mean 2022, you have about 30,000 of persons who were pushed back, rescued, or intercepted in sea. And where they will be? They will be in Tunisia, because Tunisia, and Ivan told us about this, Tunisia don't have a process process of national NGO or international who can give response and give assistance and give shelter, food, and to these migrants. And in this case, when they are pushed back, they are intercepted, they are left in the city. So if we have so much sub-Saharan, and when I say so much, that means 10,000 of irregular migrants in Tunisia. That's because they are intercepted, because the agreement between Tunisia and Italy are
Managed.
Are well implemented. And you know that during why the president spoke, who told us about this big wave of sub-Saharan, because during last weeks there is a meeting between the responsible and the heads of the national guards and Tunisian army with the peers of the Italian side, in order to make the interception more hard and more efficient. And that's why we have so much person. And the president, when he said that there is a complot, there is funding of this of the presence of sub-Saharan, because it's normal. Who pay this the presence of sub-Saharan and irregular migration? It's Europe. And who is the benefit of this? The Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Justice, and the international or national NGO. They benefit for 5% of the fundings which is available by the European Commission and by the UN, the European Union member states. That's why I think that today we are the wave of xenophobia, of racism, and of violence against sub-Saharan migrants is because you have they are trapped between the structural and the conjunctural drivers from one side, from Africa, and in the other side they are the departure. Not Italy is now closed. It's Tunisia. They cannot leave and cross the sea, and at the same time they are intercepted in the sea. And the last
yes, sorry, Hassan, this is a very important problem. You are saying the drawback of the European policy to control the frontier is creating for the border country, especially for Tunisia, which is between Algeria and Libya, as we know, is a harbor where migrants live, a strong cost, which is in part supported by European benevolent association, but it creates many social costs or integration costs, which are added to difficult situation, economic and political situation. So this is an important drawback of these policies that Europe is not taking into account.
Yes, because I think that this crisis and the increase of sub-Saharan in Tunisia, which is I saw it by my own eyes, if we can say, this is the consequences of the good implementation between the good implementation of
good for Europe, but not for Tunisia.
Sorry.
Good for Europe, but not for Tunisia.
Yes. Good. That means
efficient, I would say efficient for Europe, but not for Tunisia.
Yes, of course. And Europe Europe don't give enough money to Tunisia, and I don't like that they give money to Tunisia to implement more externalization. But the solution is that there is more capacity for the country of origin to respond to the needs of these migrants, and also to the international NGO. And I think that we are in. I think that in the upcoming weeks and months, perhaps the situation will be worse. I am sure, because even the large Tunisian opinion is accept what the president said, what the authorities said.
Yes. A last comment, Hassan. What is another point that you want to raise? That you consider important that Ivan was unable to cover with enough detail, probably, given the time that we gave him.
I think the most important that the management of these the consequences of this driver, which Ivan described and presented, how we can manage I'm sure that we will have more and more, perhaps, migrants, because the drivers from sub-Saharan Africa look for the Sahel area.
But Hassan, I remember that Tunisia had a preferential agreement. I remember that all the times I was going to the conferences, the Tunisian members were asking, I mean, we have a quota system for Tunisia to enter to Italy. We've never filled. So that means we can have 10,000, 100,000 can enter. And I was trying to explain that, yes, but now we have all the Albanian that's arrived. So our labor market is taken. We cannot add. I know that we have signed this preferential agreement with Tunisia, but our labor market has a limited capacity to host a foreign worker. Now the Albanian are part of the economy. I think these are not a pressure anymore, but the quota that the country has are not filled. We will have a section on with Giulia Marchesini on the youth and the education of the youth as a key solution for the migration in the Mediterranean. Like Giulia Marchesini is from the CMI, the center in Marseille, who was before with the UN, with the World Bank, and so on. They made a big studies, but I also know that, for instance, Moroccans were always complaining that each year they train 4,000 engineers and 1,000 for sure they will leave, and the story of brain drain. So the solution that Marchesini will suggest is a solution that increases the brain drain, which is one of the problems of the reality. Do you think that will be a possibility to improve the organization? Because for me, it's a problem of governance, organization, which is very weak. This inflow of work, of migrant, of worker from the neighbor countries.
You know that Europe, as I know, never the European country, they said that we need and we have to open and we need more and more. I mean, through agreement which allow a regular pathway to access to Europe. And I take the example of the brain drain. It's informal, regular migration. What I mean? That means that you have a contract between hospitals and the private sector in Europe with these engineers and informatics and all that, and they access to Europe without problem. And at the same time, don't forget that we have this big and massive brain drain from Tunisia. You know, since 2011 till 2020, there is 100,000 of all
Highly skilled.
the category of high skills. And in the same time, we have 100,000 of irregular Tunisia, irregular migrants who crossed the Mediterranean to Italy from Tunisia, from the same, since 2011. So we have to access to Europe, and we are speaking about sub-Saharan, and we have more than we have perhaps 200,000 of Tunisians who are irregular in Europe. And
Yes, you should say.
Just to say, when I told about sub-Saharan migrants, don't forget that we have more and more irregular Tunisian migrants who arrive and who reach Europe by irregular way.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Sometimes we forget, but Tunisia has a period in which was booming, there was wealth, everything was increasing. After the political situation changed, the economy declined, and we are back. There was a phase where Tunisia didn't want to move because they thought they were able to reproduce at home the well-being that they were hoping in the future. And now the economic situation, the political situation are not as favorable as before. And so there is a return to the move.
Yes.
I have a student that had a question. She's coming here. Sorry. I would like to monopolize the conversation, but you see, I have to be democratic.
It was more a technical question for Ivan.
Many.
In a slide, you presented the data for 2013, which is 10 years ago. So I was wondering if we have no data for today, for nowadays, or if it was like a chosen option.
Data for what?
Ma di che cosa?
C'è una slide in cui faceva vedere il GDP per capita con diciamo, l'aumento della migrazione. Che
No, but this is just a technical, because you start from 1 year, you do this. So,
la domanda è tipo adesso, a 10 anni di distanza.
But this is the shape.
You refer to this? You refer to this table?
No. She wanted the inverted U shape for income that you showed before.
Okay.
This one.
No, this one, actually I did it in 2015, and only I haven't taken the pain to do it now, but the pattern would be very similar.
But the shape is the same.
But we do have the data. Actually, this data, and we do have better data than at the time. So, sorry.
See, the students are all impressed. No, Ivan, you see, the students are all impressed by asylum seeker, but they don't understand the size of the phenomenon. The asylum seeker only in 2015 were 1,500,000, but in general, the inflow in Europe of migrants is more than 2 million, every year. So you see, you have the peak just in 2015, you had a share of the total was asylum seeker. Later on, they went down to 600,000. Only that that everybody speak about asylum seeker. Instead, the other labor migrant, family unification, and so on are much larger. So don't be displaced by this. So the number of people that come in silence because happily they arrive safely without all this dramatic story are much more.
Alexandra,
yes,
I propose, most of them are master students, if I'm not wrong. So what I propose is that they are less lazy than I was for this graph, and they can construct this graph. I mean, if you want to look in the World Development Indicators, you have these axes, and then UNDISA, you have this one. And then you have to make the regression curve. That's all.
Yes.
Absolutely. Here, these are the data updated until 2021, which are the last ones I bet.
Yes. Yes, but you see, no, we work all the time on this, so we know very, very well the story. Instead, for them, it's something new, and this is inverted U-shapes work for all the countries, all the world, because it's part of the constraint that the individual people has. So if they don't have, so they are based on individual data. So if you have a shock, usually done with labor magnet, not with asylum seeker. Asylum seeker are in a different graph. Because the asylum seeker, we will show you have different variables in the regression in which you explain this. But the inverted U-shape that Ivan was showing is a strong result of the research. So if the country is very poor, nobody move. If the country is increasing the income per capita, as you see, is moving. Laughter is what is very impressive in this graph is the income per capita of Libya. But you don't need only income per capita. You see, income per capita, Libya is a country with a lot of oil, so the income per capita is high. So you need level of education, other human capital index to understand very well. And Libyan don't move, but also
You
they're
have
very
here Libya, which is an immigration country, Gabon, which is an immigration country, and Equatorial Guinea, which is an immigration country.
they're all countries rich of oil.
Of course, of course.
Of course.
Which is interesting
But
as
a lot
the
of human
emigration rate is as low in these three countries as it is in Niger, in South Sudan, in those countries.
So I would like to thank everybody. We arrive at the time. The student has another class now. They have to leave. I will record the presentation. I will send it to you to have your approval and to put on the seminar web. Thank you very much, Hassan and Ivan, for being with us. And if the student has other questions and they want to communicate with you, if you don't mind, we will share, I will send you a message to have your feedback. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Thank you.